Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on our Wednesday Hebrew word study, and glad that you are joining us. Hope you had a good holiday last week and that all is going well with all of you, and appreciate that you take the time to listen to the study either live in person or later on when it's recorded. Well, we're continuing today in Judges chapter 17, and we are picking up in verse 6, as you can hopefully see on our screen. And this is the kind of a sad epitaph for everything we're going to encounter through the next few chapters here, that there was no king in Israel, but every man did that which was right in his own eyes. And our last session, we talked a little bit about what difference the king would make in the whole situation. But here we're going to see that people are just doing their own thing, doing what was right in their own eyes. And so uh, we will spend quite a bit of time on just this remaining verses of the chapter, verses 7 through 13. And there was a young man out of Bethlehem, or house of bread, and hyphenated Judah, and it was of the family of Judah. But what's interesting here is he was a Levite. Now, remembering that there were 12 children of um, Jacob, or Israel as he became known later. And so there was a son who was Judah, and there was a son who was Levi. And so what's interesting here is that a Levite could only be from the descendant or the tribe of Levi or Levi. But here we have apparent intermarriage that has taken place, that one of them was from Judah and one was from Levi. And so this son that was born was having a little bit of an identity problem. And so this is kind of interesting. Here's where it starts, because the tribe of Levi were those who were assigned to the care of the tabernacle. They were assigned the priesthood, and they had this specific duty. They couldn't own land. They were designated to be working in the tabernacle. That was their lot in life just because of how they were born. But what happened here is there's some difficulty in identifying what his real purpose in life is, I think, because he was of the tribe of the family of Judah. And so when we look to the Jewish commentator whose name is Rashi, he says that father was from the tribe of Judah and the mother was from the tribe of Levi. And in Jewish tradition, the identification of being Jewish is passed through the mother, that the father is not as critical for determining if the child is going to be Jewish or not. And you'll find that it's that way today in the Jewish culture, that it's the mother who is the determining factor of whether that child born is truly Jewish or not. And so that's where some of this is kind of interesting. So the mother was a Levite, and the father was from the tribe of Judah. And we see here in verse 8 that the child, for whatever reason, did not stay with his tribe of Levi and serve in the tabernacle. And it says he was sojourning. He departed out of Bethlehem to sojourn where he could find a place. So this is a guy who really having trouble, I believe, finding a place to fit in. You know, his dad was from Judah, his mom was from Levi, and maybe they didn't accept him in the work of the Levitical priesthood because he was kind of a half and half. And for whatever reason, he decided he didn't fit in, and so he went to find a place. I find that kind of interesting, um, easy to identify and put a um, modern day application there, that we're all trying to find a place. We're trying to find a place where we fit in. And many people never find that place. Again, we want to, know that in the will of God, we can find what God has created us for. And so thinking back again to this verse, going back to verse 6, that he's doing what was right in his own eyes. And so there's just a lot packed into the story. So he came to Ephraim, he came to the house of Micah, and he sojourned there. Now remember, last week we talked about, or last time we talked about this guy, Micah, who was possibly the son of Delilah, because there's the reference of 1,100 pieces of silver that Micah had stole them, found out he was cursed from his mom, came back and repented, gave mom back the money, and they took 200 shekels of the silver and made a graven image, and this was in the house of Micah. So here's the setup, okay, that Micah has got this little idol set up, and this guy comes knocking on his door who is a Levite, who's of the priesthood family, and he knocks on the door, and Micah sees this as a golden opportunity to continue his little form of religion here, where he's got his own idol, but he's got nobody to be the priest. He's got no one to do all the religious uh, rituals that he would assign to this. And, he would say, wow, how fortuitous, that suddenly I get this Levite who's kind of a wandering soul here knocking on my door. you know, Everything must be coming into place. And so the Micah said to him, where are you coming from? What are you doing? What you looking for? And he says, I'm a Levite of the Benjamin of Judah. Now, he doesn't say he was a Judahite. He puts the emphasis on Levite. So that would indicate that he's got kind of a spiritual connection going on here, where he identifies, and he goes, I'm sojourning that I can find a place. This is somewhat mysterious. What does it mean to find a place? We don't know for sure, but you can let your mind wander a little bit here, that he was just, I think, trying to find a place to fit in, that he had a spiritual side to him that was looking where he could be useful. He was trying to fulfill his spiritual place in life, is how I like to think of it. And Micah does a little hurrah here in verse 10 and says, dwell with me. And then he uses some really strange words. He says, be unto me a father, be unto me a priest, and I'm going to pay you. I'm going to give you 10 shekels of silver each year annually. I'm going to give you a new change of clothing, suit of apparel, and you're going to get your room and board. I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to feed you. I'm going to clothe you. I'm going to house you, and I'm going to give you 10 shekels of silver. And the Levite said, sounds like a good deal to me. I'm finding a place. I got a place to live. I got a place to be fed. I'm going to get some money. And so the Levite went in there. But as I'm looking at this, I'm thinking 10 shekels of silver. And I can't help but think of a few verses previously where we were talking about 1,100 pieces of silver is what Delilah got for betraying Samson, and 200 of it was spent on this, little figurine, this little idol that he had. And I start comparing those amounts of money to the 10 shekels of silver per year, pull out my old calculator and divide 10 shekels by 1,100. And that was 110 years worth of time that this guy would have to work to make 1,100 pieces of silver at 10 shekels or 10 pieces a year. So this doesn't seem like a really good deal. Um, I don't know why this guy is agreeing to it, but then I guess I think of my own self in doing my volunteer work and thinking that I volunteer and I do it because I feel it's a calling from God. I don't get paid for my volunteer work. I feel that I'm contributing and I'm doing what God has called me to do. So I start to see a little bit of that here in this Levite guy, that he's not in it for the money. To use modern terminology, he's looking at it that God is taking care of him. He's making a little bit. He's being taken care of. He's got a mission. He's got a purpose. And, maybe he's desperate, or maybe he just has a heart that he wants to do charity and mission work. So it says the Levite went in. Notice his name isn't even mentioned here. We never find out the young man's name. We don't even really know much about him, other than verse 7 says he was a young man. And we get to verse 11, and it says the Levite was content to dwell with the man, and the young man went was onto him as one of his sons. So there's just a lot of weird things swirling around here. That this guy Micah is obviously an older man because he's has sons, and Micah's sons are about the same age as this young man, but yet here Micah is making this guy a father to him, meaning again, that's a strange understanding of what this meant. Obviously a father figure, maybe someone you would take advice from. Okay, I can gather that, but that would fall under the term of priest. If you're going to want this guy to be your priest, you would take advice from him in a spiritual realm. Why does he say that he's going to be a father to him? So this is really interesting. I don't get any help from any of the Jewish commentaries, never talk about this at all. But, what is Micah thinking? Again, everybody's doing what's right in their own eyes. I'm trying to, maybe you got some thoughts on why he calls him or designates him to be a father, which would normally be someone in an elderly position. And maybe it just has to do with another word synonymous for priest. It's someone that would uh, provide direction and guidance, maybe in a more natural realm, not just in a religious realm, that the priest would cover the religious side of it. The father terminology covers things that are not religious in nature, but that Micah would still defer to him, knowing that he's got a spiritual background and maybe can give him advice in worldly matters also. So maybe that's where this context fits in. And the Levite was content to dwell with him, became one of his sons. And verse 12 has got some interesting words in it. He says, and Micah consecrated the Levite. Now, in our, you know, church goingness and in our religious systems and religious talk, we throw around a lot of words like consecrated, dedicated, um, and there's so many other words that are called churchese, if you will, words that when you come and start digging deeper into religiosity, you get exposed to all these words, and sometimes we struggle to understand what the true meaning of these words are. Propitiation is another one, um, salvation, and consecration, all of those, even the terms of worship and having a worship service, and all those things are words that we use so often, but how often do we take the time to really look at what they mean? So we're going to do that with this word consecrated. When we look at it in the Hebrew, the word consecrated um, comes from this word here, wamalale, and when we open it up, it just means to be full or to fulfill. And so this understanding is that Micah was getting fulfilled of everything that he wanted to do. Now that's somewhat different than what we think of consecrated, as if we consecrate or dedicate ourselves to the Lord, or many other places you'll find in the Bible where this term consecration is used. In those cases, the term consecrated means to be dedicated, means to be set aside, um, only used for a specific purpose. And so if we think of it in that term, we think that this young man was set aside in Micah's house. He was only being used for religious purposes. He didn't milk the cow. He didn't chase the sheep. He didn't shovel out the barn. He didn't plant corn or wheat or any of those things as the other kids did, but he was just in the house and was only there for religious purposes. And it says the young man became his priest. Doesn't mention his father figure, but became his priest and was in the house of Micah. So it's like, okay, what did this guy do all day? If he didn't do any other work, what was he doing? Walking around? I mean, yes, he could pray. They didn't have a Bible. They didn't have, doesn't say he had the Word of God there. Um, Very challenging to know what this guy did all day in his house. Did they have morning devotions? I could imagine that this Levite led the morning devotions. He led the prayer at lunchtime. He led the prayer at supper time. He led the evening devotions. Maybe sometime during the day they had some time where they did devotions together. Very challenging to know how this guy would stay busy all day long. Um, and because there was no Bible to study, so it wasn't like he was haven't had any reading material. So again, very interesting. Now, what we see here is that this obviously fit what Micah wanted for a religious system, because he says in verse 13 that now I know that the Lord, you'll notice that the word Lord is all in capital letters, which designates the word Yahweh. When we look at it in the Hebrew, here you definitely see the letters Yud, He, Vav, He, which is word for Yahweh. Many observant Orthodox Jewish people will not pronounce the word Yahweh. They will call it Adonai or Hashem, which means the name in Hebrew, or they will say it's Yud He Vav He when they're reading this. But the word I want to focus on is, what did Micah think he was getting out of this? He says, now I know that God will be good to me because I have a Levite as a priest. And I want to focus on this word good, which is spelled Tov, or pronounced Tov. We find this word being used during the creation, where God will say, He made the heavens and the earth. Each day of creation, He looked at it was morning and it was evening, and He looked at it and it was good. And He uses the same word, Tov, for good. Tov in Hebrew is really has the root understanding of being a musical term that means to be in harmony. And it gives the idea that when instruments are playing together and they're all in tune and they're playing their um, proper parts, they blend together and they create a sound that flows and that's harmonious. And so when God is saying that He's creating and lists all the things on the different days of creation, and He says that it was good, He's not saying that it never, that sometimes we think of being good as when we do the right things, or that we're good at heart, or that we are in alignment with certain terms and conditions. God is saying here, when something is good, meaning it is in harmony, meaning it is fulfilling the purpose in which it was created for, and it's in harmony with God's intentions, in harmony with His ideas and His plan and His purpose. We could use the terminology that it's in God's will, that it's fulfilling His will. So Micah was saying here that, well, I got all the parts in place here. I got all the pieces in order. I got the little idol. I got the whatever shrine area he had set up. I have a Levite as a priest who is, part of God's family, God's children, and now I know that everything will be in harmony with me. It doesn't mean that God will shower him with, blessings or financial rewards or any of those things. He's just saying, my life will be in harmony. I will be in alignment. I will be in God's will, and that my life will be full of harmony and flow well in what God wants me to do, as much as he knew that. As we finish, and this is the end of the chapter, I was just flooded with lots of questions that I didn't have answers to, but I'm going to share those with you and give you some things to think about. First of all, was Micah correct in his thinking? Keep that in mind as we go into the next chapter, which will continue with following this guy Micah. And then the second question is, does God only reward us if we first do things to try to win His favor? That's another implication here. He thinks, if I do the right thing, God is going to have to respond, and has no choice but to respond in good for me. Is that really right thinking? And the next question is, what was Micah's motive? What motivated him to do this? he been working, has God been working in his heart, and this was just somewhat of an active level of spirituality coming into his home? He obviously felt there was a need for this. And then the next question is, why is this story even here? What is it trying to tell us? Could it tell us that most of the people on that day just didn't care at all about incorporating any spirituality or any essence of God into their daily lives? And this was an example that even though we may see things don't work out the way Micah maybe intended, or that maybe things don't look the way we wanted them to look, he's still kind of getting credit here. He's getting a biblical notation that he was doing the right thing in his heart, that his heart, we would say his heart was in the right place, and he had a desire to draw near to God, and so he gets this little chapter and few verses assigned to him to commemorate that no one else was trying to do the right thing. But here, this guy was trying to do the right thing, even though he may have gone about it in ways that were not, we would say, correct. And so I want you to hold all those thoughts, all those questions, and we'll regroup again next week and look at the next chapter and see if any of these questions gets answered for us. So thanks again for joining. Pray God's blessing upon you, and hope to see you next week. Bye-bye.